At this stage, it's not a toughness issue that I need to figure out. So what is it about the actual movements that I'm struggling with? I realized my designs were like these comprehensive, like well thought out things, and then it would be like plus 30 minutes of mobility with some links to some banded stretches that would hopefully create change from assessments that I saw, like this person's movement in this movement isn't good, so do this thing on your shoulder to transfer into snatch. People would do it for months and not get change at all. They get in the gym, they take their pre-workout, they're fired up, they hit their strength work, they hit their energy system work, and then their movement training is like an afterthought. It's like, People think of it so outcome driven, and so like, okay, I'm moving in the right direction, that they never stop to reflect and say like, is this pattern that I'm using right now, or this approach that I'm using right now, the one that's ultimately gonna lead me to whatever my goal is. If you're like most people, when you think of movement training, two things probably come to mind. On one hand, you'll think of elaborate skills you see in advanced athletes training. Backflips, handstand walking, advanced gymnastic skills, huge weightlifting metrics, explosive jumping power, or yogi-like flexibility. On the other hand, you'll think of the type of training you do when you're injured, where you're forced to slow down and rethink the way that you move, where you must be careful, slow, challenged to be still, fight your feelings of boredom, and perform what many people consider to be monotonous rehab exercises. But that's not really an appropriate way to think about movement training if you want to become a successful, long-lasting coach. It can't be an afterthought. It's not something you start thinking about only when training high-level athletes or when someone gets injured. Movement training has become a vital part of my coaching framework, and that is why I created this course.
He used to always push us to do Facebook Live stuff, and it made me so uncomfortable and nervous.
A booger on my right side?
Huh? A booger?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't see it.
I feel like there's a booger in there.
Do I have a fly buzzing in front of my face? Huh? My brother's wedding.
You're sure I don't have a booger?
I can't see a booger from here. The camera probably can.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're going to have an hour-long video where I have a booger in my house.
Booger's there the whole time.
It's like, oh,
completely distracting the audience.
Job, but you got to redo it.
I don't know what he said, but that dude had a booger the whole time. I just watched Max talk with a booger in his nose for an hour.
Yeah, it's in there.
And you just actually moved it.
Now you can see it?
It's more visible now.
I'm
totally kidding. I can't see anything.
All right, good.
All right, man. So let's just dive right in because it's hot as shit.
Yep.
And
I'll be sweating very shortly.
But this is a good environment to sit on a box and stare at you.
Yeah, because our posture will be visible to the world.
Yeah. If I slouch at all, I've been instructed to sit tall the entire time. So not only is that perfect scenario for talking about movement, but we'll see if I start to degrade as this goes on. So yeah, man, tell me what sparked the initial thought and idea of creating a movement course.
How far back do you want me to go to create that?
As far back as you want.
Yeah. Well, I think first what got me into the concept of movement and exploring it, thinking about it, researching it, going to courses on it, I think most people in the coaching field seem to become coaches for similar reasons. Either they were athletes when they were younger, or they're insecure about the way they look and they want to change the way that they look, and then they realize they have a knack for doing it and help others change the way that they look. They fall in love with strength sports or strength disciplines. They fall in love with energy systems. And so that was kind of my path. It was like, got chubby as a little kid and then wanted to start training seriously because I didn't want to be the fat kid. Mm-hmm. Then became a relatively successful athlete, and then I was researching strength systems, energy systems to try to get better at performance. Like, I wanted to be a champion, so I wanted to understand what competitive edge could I gain from my intellect that maybe some other athletes didn't have. Maybe they had more physical gifts. Like, what could I capitalize on? And so I went down that rabbit hole for a while, and I kind of left the thought of movement to movement professionals, PTs, chiros, going to orthopedic surgeons. And really, I only started even thinking about the concept of movement when I was injured. Like, you know, I'm hurt. I need to go to somebody help me with my movement. Okay, tell me what to do.
Reactive approach.
Yeah, very reactive. So at some point, I think it was just frustration. I was like, okay, well, now there are energy system problems that I feel like I need to solve in a different way. Like, I'm not gonna get any tougher at dealing with this type of discomfort. Like, my heart rate's out of control, my respiration's out of control, I'm hyperventilating. It's at this stage, it's not a toughness issue that I need to figure out. So what is it about the actual movements that I'm struggling with? And then it started with investigation with technical experts. So finding running coaches, finding weightlifting coaches, finding gymnasts to work with, and starting to evaluate how they thought about movement, how they thought about movement patterns, why I need, like, what can I potentially do to make myself more enduring, more strong? Because I was still coming at the equation from that. Then I think the research over time kind of spiraled to start to change my understanding of physical training, like trying to identify what could potentially be changed from a movement perspective that would then carry over into behavioral change, into changes with regards to strength, into changes with regards to how people are perceiving pain. And I realized that there was this weird situation where I was in with athletes. They would start to get into pain and I didn't know what to do. I'm like, all right, well, like, go get it checked out. Like, you know, tell me what's going on. Then you go get it checked out, you know, maybe they get imaging, nothing's wrong. Okay, they come back to me, they want to train again, but the pain's inhibiting them from doing something. So my understanding of what to do from a training perspective there was just kind of blunted. I was like, okay, I have these tools that are, you know, structured and systematic strength progressions, structured and systematic energy system progressions. But if somebody can't do a movement because they're in pain, what is my way to regress that in a systematic way to be able to allow them to get better? So I started kind of really investigating that concept maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, just taking every course that I could. Ido Portal, I think, was one of the influencers in me thinking about the movement from a philosophical big picture perspective, but there were a ton of courses and a ton of people who kind of influenced my thought process, and I started integrating it with my own experience, my own training experience, and eventually I realized, like, okay, well, this is one of my competitive edges. Like, my athletes come to me to ask me, like, how they should move in a different way. When my athletes are experiencing pain, they come to me. So I have something to offer. And so that was the first time where I was like, okay, I need to create a movement course. So I added the movement course to our original 4 courses as like the 5th, because I was like, well, these 5 things need to be taught to establish somebody as, I have a base level of knowledge to be a coach now. Like, that's how big the concept of movement had become in my mental framework of training. So I created that. I got some feedback on it. And then I wanted to do it better. I want to upgrade all the courses, and we kind of have decided to do that. And the movement was the first one where I was like, all right, well, let's tackle this.
I was going to ask, like, you know, go back 5 years when you started building Training Think Tank's principles and structure of how to write program design for different areas. Movement wasn't necessarily like a main target yet. Like, you understand that, like, you had to have movement to be able to do these things. But it wasn't like the main priority that got the same attention as a strength program or energy system designs. Fast forward, what's the framework like now? How is your hierarchy different now?
I think it was the same issue, that I just thought movement was a thing that coaches couldn't investigate. I just thought it was reserved for, well, you got to go to school for it. Which now in hindsight, I'm like, that's silly. Like, I didn't go to school for exercise phys, and like, you know, I still explore those concepts and apply them to my training. But I realized my designs were like these comprehensive, like well thought out things, and then it would be like plus 30 minutes of mobility with some links to some banded stretches that would hopefully create change from assessments that I saw. Like, this person's movement in this movement isn't good, so do this thing on your shoulder to transfer into snatch. People would do it for months and not get change at all. And they would be like, I don't know why I'm doing it. I don't know, like, how to make it better.
And they check out.
And I also didn't have tools to prescribe. Like, I'm like, man, all the coaching I do from a movement perspective is tactile. It's
Yeah.
in person. I like move this, tighten this, hold here, brace for a second. Okay,
Yeah.
take a breath through your nose, like that type of stuff. And so I think it took a while to try to figure out from a remote perspective, how do you deliver the same level of quality that you do from a strength progression or from an energy system progression or from like a nutritional lifestyle recommendation standpoint when it's applied to movement, when you might not necessarily be hands-on with somebody while they're moving.
Yeah, so leading into that, how it sounds like it's a really hard thing to try and organize.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of moving parts. It's not like, strength metrics where you have something that's like very easy to test and then see the progress and go from there. Like, explain to me the process and how your thought process has changed on how to organize something that's so broad.
I think maybe the problem from an organizational perspective, at least the way that I saw it, is that there seem to be two major camps that are out there teaching movement. There's the philosophers, I would call them, who are great at what they do from a movement perspective. And I have some contact with coaches who are educated in that realm, but people who follow principles like the Alexander technique and Feldenkrais method and Ida Rolf, and maybe you can integrate Thomas Myers and fascial theory into that, where there is science and rigorous research, but a lot of it is in maybe the poetry with which they speak. So you almost have to immerse yourself in those cultures to try to understand what the hell they're trying to say, because it's not systematic. It might be systematic in application when you get inside of it and when you get a coach, but when you're just trying to learn, it's not like a systematic hierarchy of like, do this, this is how you do it. And so it's left for you to like have these mind-blowing epiphanies and thoughts about how to move and how to explore movement and how to think about movement, which is great and was beneficial for me. It was a catalyst for my curiosity, but it didn't tell me what to do. Then on the opposite side is maybe like the biomechanic style of movement, thinking about the human body in terms of its lever systems. And we always have to create models to organize our thought processes, or to organize something that's infinitely complex. We have to create model frameworks. So the human body modeled as a lever system, like in a biomechanical model, is helpful, right? When you squat, your knee does go into dorsiflexion and it does act as a hinge. But when you swing a golf club and you have like a ton of rotational stress and you're pivoting and your hip is internally rotating, your knee is not really acting as a hinge joint in that. There is some tibial rotation that's happening, and people talk about that, but I feel like in some ways you have to kind of think about movement in a way that you're going to train and find a goal in movement. So I feel like those two polar opposite ways of thinking is, one is like very linear and very structured, but it's too simplistic when it's applied to things that are out, like weightlifting and powerlifting are simple sports. I hate to say that because you still have to be insanely technical to be world class, but the skill,
the demands are very known.
The demands are known. The joints involved are going through relatively simple patterns. It's not reactive, like, catching a football while you're running full speed this way,
with
while
rotation,
you're spotting the field to make sure you're not getting hit, jumping up, rotating, spotting the ball, still being peripherally aware that you might get hit, then have to be aware of, if I do get hit, how do I react quick enough to the impact of the floor that I don't hurt myself? Like, that level of movement complexity, I think, doesn't really. So there's a lot of strength coaches that are left when they're evaluating, how do I get somebody better at something like football that has the complexity, or something like CrossFit where it's like unknown and unknowable? How do I solve that movement equation when I only have these two perspectives? I have the one that's very structured and systematic, one that's very esoteric and philosophical. And so what I first tried to do to organize it was create a model of movement quality. How do I evaluate movement quality? How do I explain it? So we have characteristics of movement, like movement intensity, which is very clear to understand. Like, if I'm evaluating the intensity of somebody's deadlift as a specific movement, if it goes up in load, they have improved their intensity. Or movement endurance. So if I take the same movement and I evaluate the endurance and say, okay, do 100 for time at 135, now I have models of movement quality on those two. And then I have others like movement virtuosity, which is about like the individual level of expression with regards to movement that comes from you having your own unique subsets of injuries, of past training, of nutrition, of behaviors, of fears, of motivations, of ambitions. And I created characteristics to try to say like, well, first of all, what is movement quality? What is a good movement? Like, you know, I don't know if there's necessarily good or bad, but how do I create a model for teaching that? Then I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a simple way to explain it. Then, okay, what tools do you have at your disposal to change movement? So I created a system of specific tools to apply to somebody's movement training. So you have the common ones that you see, like locomotion or banded stretching, or people talk about breathing, but they don't have a systematic way to say like, okay, well, I want to get somebody better at breathing in something. So I created a systematic subset of tools. Then, okay, now that you have that, how do you assess somebody's movement so that you can select which tools are appropriate to change their movement? And then finally concluding with kind of a programming structure of like, here's the philosophy of how you program, and then here are some sample programs, and walking through like what they're for, how they're cued, how the movement's cued, how do you progress them from week to week or month to month, or how do you think about progression? And I created a system for how to attack movement training the same way you have systems for like, how do you apply nutrition if you want to lean somebody out? You have like macronutrient prescriptions, micronutrient prescriptions, sleep, meal timing, like all of those things, and people create systems for them. And what I tried to do is reconcile those two models and say, okay, well, I still do believe there is something magical about thinking about movement. It's this big overarching umbrella that kind of drives our lives. Like if your heart stops moving, you die. So like movement inherently is esoterically like life. So, but if you go that big, it's hard to like, oh, cool, like shut up already and tell me what to do because I'm a coach. So I needed to kind of integrate that other side as well. So I tried to, that's how I tried to build my model or my systems.
It sounds like it fulfills the demands from both parties. So one side you have people who maybe from the mover community or free runners or, you know, parkour or dancers that their demands for what they want to do aren't necessarily something that's very clear in terms of like what patterns they need to have. It's they need more independent exploration. And how do you teach that? How do you put that into a process? And then on the other side, you've got people that are using movement and these principles as a tool to get better at something specifically. So it sounds like it kind of fulfills the demand for both sides of it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the principles I have in the course, like movement or evaluating movement, requires context. So if you want to be a high movement freedom individual, have the ability to move your joints in a ton of varied and chaotic ways, it is helpful not to think about movement as a structured and regimented linear style of movement, because you end up kind of moving how you think in some ways. And if you think about movement as like being really intense and really linear and really predictable, then it's very hard to try to, like, because you're nervous, like there's a self-organization process. Your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your joints, all of those things are operating as one human. And I feel like it does kind of serve both markets, but maybe if you wanted to be a specialist in one or a specialist in the other, then it's more about understanding the principles and then going back and doing your own work into like, how do I apply this to my demographic, which is what I hope to do. I mean, I'd like to, Training Think Tank is a culture that has been built on a combating of thoughts and ideas, and also people coming together, taking an idea and building it into something better and more robust together. So if we put our ideas out into the internet and people share them and they get on the forums and they're from all different demographics and communities, it just builds the models and the systems and the methods better. And it just makes maybe our profession as coaches more professional. Like we can demand higher rates from people, we can have better organizations, we can charge more for our time. And I think it does good in general to share those ideas. Just to get into some details of it, what are some of the things that you've included in this new edition that was missing in the last edition, things that you've learned? Yeah, so the first thing I learned is that I wanted to, I had so much passion for the information that I was learning about movement, and I wanted to systematize the information into an organized thought process. And so it was very scientific. There was a lot of information about plasticity in the nervous system, how breathing related to the autonomic nervous system, tension and the stretch reflex and how to modulate it. We talked about other experts in the market so that I could basically divert people to the experts I learned from, because I was trying to give back in some way. And what I got from a feedback perspective was man, this was mind blowing. It was super helpful, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And that was a real reflection piece for me, because that's not the legacy I wanted to leave as a teacher.
Right.
I wanted people to
cool.
take
Thanks for the ideas.
Thank you, cool. Now I have more work to do to become better. That still is part of how I teach. I don't think
lead to self-discovery.
Yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for experience, but I can give my experience to somebody else and say, this is what I've learned, these are the mistakes that I've made, now go do your own work and try not to fall into the same freaking potholes that I fell into on your path.
Yeah.
So when I created this one, I thought, okay, from a practical standpoint, what do people need? The first thing I thought was they need to see the movement tools.
Yeah.
They need to act you can only talk about movement so much.
Yeah.
You have to actually visibly see it. Then if you're a coach and you're prescribing it, you also need to send it to your people.
Yeah.
And I knew if I just taught movement tools and I didn't create an index of movement and I didn't create some sort of easy way for them to share that with their people, then I'm creating a ton of work for them to build the infrastructure and platform in their own business to then deliver that to their clients.
Yeah.
So I created a YouTube page that's public and free that acts as an accessory that shows all the movements. It has them categorized. It explains them on the front end in an introduction, which allows for people to send it to their clients and have a why are we doing this type discussion before you have to talk about it with your client, right? So you can actually have some authority figure telling their clients, hey, you should do this and this is why, and B, so that those people do it with more quality. Because when you're doing movement training, most people are in there, they get in the gym, they take their pre-workout, they're fired up, they hit their strength work, they hit their energy system work, and then their movement training is an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's ugh. And if that's how you approach training, you're probably not going to change your movement quality for the better. So that needed to get changed. So that's the first thing. The second thing was I realized that I needed to actually show people how to go from the process of I'm starting with a person and then I'm taking them all the way up through a program. So that's starting with the assessment process. And I broke it down into 4 specific steps that you go through when you're assessing movement. I also illustrated an actual assessment process with Kyle, one of our coaches, and showed what that looks like. Then we went into okay, well, now that you have that, how do you go through program design and how do you actually think about programming? And then here are some sample programs that take those concepts we just discussed. Now let's walk through them and let me explain why each movement's in there, how to read the program. We have an FAQ for the actual programming. Then I put other additional sample programs in there so that when people finish the course, they know okay, now I know how to start. I actually can help people, as opposed to now I have all this information and I don't know what to do. So I
read the instructions for an hour and I don't even know how to start playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my thought was with this iteration that it does take into consideration some of the science stuff, and we talk about that. We talk about breathing in the autonomic nervous system and how they work together. We talk about the stretch reflex, but now it's more about
application.
Application. And so we take those other concepts that are still super important, and when we build out the final of the repeats, the Science of Training course, we'll kind of dig really into depth on those things. But I don't really think most coaches need to understand the deep nuance of the autonomics nervous system. It's just, I don't think that's going to help you work one-on-one with a person or help write a better program.
But the references and the tools are there to know where to go seek out that information.
And so I still kept that in there. I just didn't talk about it in the course. There's still a huge books, resources, YouTube, archive, all the information that we referenced, courses that we referenced and have taken, textbooks, books that we read, sorted by every chapter. Because I still do believe that nobody's really like creating knowledge. We're all kind of sharing the same knowledge and building it. And so what I did with my course was I put it into a package that I thought would make people better coaches, but I also gave, respect to the people that helped me build my ideas and my models.
Yeah, right. Going back to something you mentioned a second ago about people not treating the movement work or improving their movement quality the same as they would as the other aspects of their training and their fitness.
Yeah.
Why is that a mistake, and why is it so important to not just move through this stuff mindlessly and just randomly pick drills?
First of all, why are you not sweating and I'm
I don't know. I'll get this man a towel. I'm trying not to laugh about it.
I'm like, I'm sweating.
Yeah.
All right, back to the question. I
wonder how much could actually come out of you.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to cut weight pretty easily.
Just so this isn't too serious of an interview.
Yeah.
That drip of sweat down your nose right now.
I just wipe that off.
So why...
By the way, it is 90 degrees and like 100% humidity in the gym. So
on your side of the box, apparently.
Yeah.
Not on mine.
I
think Chris is getting you a towel.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be a crappy little microfiber one that doesn't absorb water. Thank you. Good stuff. All right, back to the question. Repeat the question for me.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you wipe your face?
Thank you. I'll just keep this right here.
Is this an interview or an interrogation?
I'm so nervous.
All right, yeah. So you had mentioned, in training, people just don't treat their movement work with the same quality and importance as other aspects of their training, right? Like strength, endurance, whatever. Why is that a mistake, and why is it so important to have a more mindful approach?
Yeah, I think most people think about movement training as their priority for like two things. Mm-hmm. One is you end up working with high-level athletes and you are aware of how much the actual technical aspects of movement, like the minor footwork details, make a difference, but in the cream of the crop, separating the Rich Fronings from the people right underneath, or the Matt Fraser from the people right underneath. The movement quality at that, it becomes obvious. When you see somebody's movement degrade in fatigue-based competition, then I have to prioritize that.
At some point you understand that just giving them more of that isn't going to make them better.
Yeah. So those people do take it seriously, and most people who coach them know and do take it seriously. And if you look at how those people approach their training, they are taking movement training seriously because they're always thinking about how to move faster, how to move more efficiently, how to move with more precision.
Yeah.
Then you have the pain experience. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's experiencing pain that is overwhelming to them or that's taking too much of their attentional resources will start seeking help for movement. They'll find
it's a strong motivator.
Yeah, it is a huge motivator. So I think fundamentally we've created a marketplace where only those two people are talking about movement. You get hurt, you go to somebody who's a movement professional, then they send you back, and because most coaches don't have the tools to kind of bridge the gap back to performance, they end up kind of falling back into the same pain trap, kind of hurt themselves, go back, and then eventually the feedback becomes stop doing what you're doing if it's causing you pain. And then you potentially lose a client. So there's not a lot of synergy between the movement professionals and the coaches.
Yeah.
I think it's just a mistake. I mean, to go back to your question and answer in clarity, I just think people don't realize how important it is, and they don't realize what they can gain from it. They don't realize that improving their respiration could potentially have impacts on the efficiency of their metabolic system and their O2-CO2 exchange, which then will lead to better endurance or better fat metabolism, which then will lead to them becoming more enduring. They just think, I need to do cardio, I'm going to jump on a machine, I'm going to go low intensity, this beat per minute, this amount of time, and then I'll lean out. But they don't think about the nuanced complexity of how having optimal way, or maybe an improved, more efficient way of moving, makes that other training more efficient and allows you to get more bang for your buck. Or taking with the strength example, like somebody needs to snatch, they might be working on like working with a coach, be vertical, stay on your heels, whatever cues are coming. But if somebody fundamentally has like an injury or some sort of pain like inside of their hip when they get into flexion, and something's so fast and happening at such high speed and load, the brain's not like consciously thinking of that. It's just moving into a position that it feels safe to do. So having tools to be able to have a low intensity way of training movement quality outside of working with a barbell can aid in your ability to have a longer career, potentially reduce injury risk over time, and really help you hit better numbers. So because nobody's really taken the concept and said, hey, movement training goes directly into your specific goals. So if you focus on it, you will get better faster and maybe have more joy with the process, because you'll feel the progress and it will have this like snowballing effect of motivation. People just are like, well, it's kind of boring, monotonous work. And they don't really have a passionate feel about it because they haven't really felt its benefits, because they don't really understand what to do, how to do it, why to do it, and have a model for prescribing it to people.
So like external motivators aside, right? Like getting out of pain, breaking a plateau, or, improving performance. The process of learning, like why is it important to have that mindful connection in training? Like, why do you need to understand why it is what you're doing?
I don't think you can troubleshoot if you're mindless. Like if you're just in a situation and you're doing things automatically, and then like you just keep going to competitions, as an example. Let's just take it out of movement. You just like, I want to get better at competing, so I'm going to keep going to competitions. You go, you take 10th place one time, you didn't really pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, I'm going to keep competing. Go to another competition. You take 5th. Oh, I must be doing something right. Go to another competition. Oh, I take 2nd. I must be doing more things right. And you keep doubling down on what you're doing. And then you go to your next 3 competitions and you go last place, 2nd to last place, 3rd to last place. If you weren't paying attention along the path and you were only looking at the score, the objective, then you don't have any sort of a ability to reflect upon what you're doing and be able to create navigational changes along the way. So I think the same thing is true with movement. People think of it so outcome driven and so like, okay, I'm moving in the right direction, that they never stop to reflect and say like, is this pattern that I'm using right now, or this approach that I'm using right now, the one that's ultimately going to lead me to whatever my goal is. And it's different for everybody. Like how you would apply movement training to a world-class powerlifter is going to be different than how you'd apply it to somebody that is a yogi that is experiencing a lot of symptoms of instability and pain. Like there's just going to be 2 totally different ways of evaluating, but the systems and the frameworks are still universally applicable if you kind of understand what each tool is for, why it's used, how to evaluate it, and you talk to your people and understand what they want to get better at. I mean, it's just also maybe just social proof. Like I've coached people for a pretty long time and built a pretty good organization, and had a pretty successful athletic career myself, taking an approach that was mindful. And I wouldn't take all the successes and things that have gone well and just say like, well, somebody does it mindlessly, so I'm going to throw out everything that I've done. I've just found being conscious and paying attention to yourself, your environment, how you move, how you're reacting to your environment. If you do that enough and you can, write it down, consult with people, then you can start navigating to really understand yourself, enjoy your life a little bit more because you're making decisions that are suiting you, and and also progress in training at its most simple level from a coaching perspective.